So, Julie, once again, welcome to this podcast. Thank you for joining. Julie, I would love to hear about your story of growth in HR and why you do what you do now. I mean, if anybody looks at your LinkedIn profile, they'll be like, man, this person is very authentic. We can feel who you are, feel your excitement, and feel your passion for the world of HR. Mm-hmm. And now I want to hear your story.
So my HR story and why I do what I do.
Right. And let me give you a tiny bit of context. I kind of mentioned in the message I sent you, but this podcast is all about reaching your ultimate potential. And that includes, to get to your potential, we have to address our mental health, right? Our emotions. Yes. And when we address that, then lets us get even further than we could otherwise. So Go ahead with your story.
Yes. So my HR story, I got into HR originally as a result of a bad experience that I had on the job. I was terminated at a very young age during my third trimester of pregnancy, and I had no idea that it was illegal to do that. I just knew that how I was treated in that moment didn't feel right to me, didn't sit well with me. And it was something that I struggled with for a very long time. And it just caused me to think about so many things about humanity in the workplace and how we treat people with dignity and respect. And why wasn't that something that was given to me in that moment of time when I would have needed it the most, when I would have been my most vulnerable? And it just kind of started me on this journey to discovery of understanding what good leadership looks like, and that I always wanted to be the opposite of that. But then what does it look like to really be in a position of leadership and servitude? And how can we really benefit from serving people with our full hearts? And so that started my journey into HR. I've been in the HR profession now for just over 16 years. I've learned so much. And one of the many things that I've learned is that when you come from a space of serving and you're not giving back to yourself, that you're going to end up in distress, burnout, fatigue, because you're constantly giving, but you're not taking back in for yourself. And so after 2 bouts of HR burnout, the second one being the most severe, causing me to kind of rethink my HR career and what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. And I realized that in having conversations with my HR peers and colleagues, that they were experiencing similar situations to me, burned out, frustrated about being in their roles. And I ended up starting coaching just unknowingly to myself, coaching my colleagues in those moments of what they were going through. And it just kind of spiraled into this thing that is now HR at Heart, which is where I now coach HR professionals, no matter what level they're at in the organization. And just helping them to connect the dots between theory and practice, because there's a lot that we do in theory and read in theory that when we come to the job, it's very different from what we're going to put into practice. And just the humanity of it that surrounds it, that causes the vulnerability that we are usually in that space. And so I'm here now. That's what I'm doing right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all that. So let me ask you a few questions about your story that you shared. Mm-hmm. I hate to overgeneralize, but for the sake of this conversation, let's say that a lot of people go into HR because we enjoy, or at least we're willing to help others, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so with your story where you said, yeah, after I went through these things, then other people came to me and I began coaching. It was almost not planned, right? They just came to you and you said, yeah, I'm happy to help. Tell us how your experiences, where you said 2 bouts of burnout, how did those experiences affect your ability to help other people at a different level? Let's start with that, and then I have a follow-up question.
Right. So obviously, I've been on this journey since my burnout experiences to healing myself. You can't help other people until you recognize that you have a problem and you help yourself. Mm-hmm. And it was in my journey of rediscovering Julie, rediscovering who I am and what I want to do and what I want to be for myself, my family, and the people that I work with and that I work for, that I started this journey of being able to help others. And I've always come from a space of wanting to genuinely give and support. I would give you my last, my very, very last, if I think it will help you. That's just me. And I will do that, not even knowing how I'm going to figure out how I'm going to take care of me next. But I've learned the importance of at least just leave a little in residual for yourself, because you're going to need it to help the next person. And so that's how I did it. So I couldn't help anyone when I was burned out, but in building and rebuilding is when I was able to recognize these things that I've struggled with and said to myself, okay, well, this is how I can help others by sharing from my experiences. And then from doing the research to share with others is what has brought me to this space.
Yes. You know exactly where I was going with this follow-up question.
Yes, I did.
So I want to hear a little bit more about what did you do to take care of yourself? Saying, okay, I've been through 2 bouts of burnout, but I'm tough and I'm just going to push on. Rather than do that, you took the time to rediscover yourself.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about that, if you would.
So the journey of self-discovery, wow. Asking myself questions. So I did a checklist. First and foremost, with regards to my career, my HR career, like what do I like about HR? What don't I like about HR? And if I had the opportunity to do something that I really loved, what would it be? What would it look like? And then I started to think about like, what would be the steps that I would take to move into that direction? But in addition to that, I went to therapy. And therapy helped me a lot with just putting things into perspective for myself about the things that I was doing that were detrimental to my mental health, and trying to find the different ways to restore that. But sitting in some very uncomfortable feelings, sitting in some very, very uncomfortable moments and sessions, to get me to a point where I was able to say, okay, well, yes, now I really need to start rebuilding. And then I also started to get coaching. I hired a coach to kind of just help me navigate what my next steps would look like and how could I put myself out there in a way that would make myself relatable to people in general. About what my next steps would be. So therapy, 100%, I'm a huge advocate for it. And I'm also an advocate for coaching, because I think that the two go hand in hand. And I still take therapy. I still go to therapy, and I still go to coaching sessions, because I think that these are very important as I develop my career. And then I just started doing stuff that I love. Like I color. I love coloring books, and sometimes that just helps me to get balanced. And so I love doing that, listening to classical music, listening to jazz, just finding the things that I love and doing those things again, going to the beach, having lunch by myself, believe it or not, like just doing things by myself, because I have 3 children and a husband. So my house is like, has people in it. So like I started taking Fridays off from January this year, where I do nothing on Fridays but something that is going to fulfill me, whether that's sitting and watching Netflix for the rest of the day, or going out and discovering parts of the island that I never knew existed, that I only found out because of tourists. And just doing different things like that really helped me to recover, in terms of recovering from my burnout, but also the mental anguish and anxiety that I feel at times.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those specific examples. And I love how you say it with the pride of, hey, I do this because I want to take care of myself, and it's working, right? I know that there's often a lot of shame associated with, oh, I saw a therapist, oh, I hired a coach, this, that, and the other. But really, to reach the levels that we want, it's, I would say, almost a necessity, but at least it helps very much to hire these types of people to see what you can't see, and to help you see the true you instead of what's been overshadowed by the experiences of the past or the barriers that are in front of us right now, right?
Definitely, I agree.
So I love what you said about burnout and frustration. So I'm going to come to that subject here in a second, but on this subject of taking care of ourselves, from your experience, both being in HR and your position now, helping other HR professionals, why do HR professionals have such a hard time taking care of themselves?
You don't have the time on this podcast for me to really talk about this, Ben.
I hit the golden question.
You really don't. There are so many reasons. I'll start with this quote that I got from Dr. Rick Rigsby that really resonates with me when I talk about this topic, and that's ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity. A lot of times as HR professionals, we let our ego get in the way. And we believe that because we are HR and we're here to support the people and that's what we get paid for, that it means that if we are saying that we need help, there's something wrong with us. We are less than. It's not something that you want to admit to your HR colleagues because you're too busy trying to show off and show them like how great your job is and how great the benefits are and how great you're able to coordinate and, you know, have this great relationship with your leadership team and your people love you, yada, yada, yada. But when I go into organizations, and I do this a lot, when I have coaching clients who tell me, you know, everything's great. I just need some help with one or two imbalances. And I go into their organizations, just depending on the type of organization it is, but if it's customer service focused, I get into conversations with people on the ground and just like, you know, how's it going? You know, how's your HR been supporting you, especially during these COVID times? And the stories I get from employees are completely different from what I hear HR professionals talking about when they say, my people love me, like this whole thing that you put out there. But then when people talk to your people, it's completely different. So that ego gets in the way. And that stops us a lot from getting the help, the support that we really do need. Because we just feel like asking for that help, asking for that support of our leaders means that we're not doing the job that they're paying us to do. And to our HR colleagues, it makes us look like we're the weakest link in the history of HR, which is nowhere near the truth. But that's the perception. Therefore, it is your reality.
Yeah. So here's just a thought that came to my mind. Do we have to be perfect in something in order to help others with that thing?
Absolutely not. I am nowhere near. I would never describe myself as perfect. No, I don't think anyone is. I think this idea of reaching out for perfection is like vanity and a striving after the wind. You can't catch the wind. You just can't. And so trying to think that you can be perfect to help others, you don't need to be. Sometimes the most important thing is when people are learning from our life lessons. And I think that's where the reward comes for me. When people are able to say, oh, thanks for being so vulnerable and sharing that. And sometimes I might be having the worst day possible. I could post about that. I might have had the worst experience I could have ever had with someone. I can post about that. And, you know, when I failed at something, I can post about that and go, but this is what I learned from failing. I think that we need to accept that even in our moments of weakness and our moments of low or vulnerability, that those are the moments that people want to know the most, because you don't want to give people the perception that you are perfect or great at this or great at that. People want to know that you're human. And to be human means you can admit the highs and lows of you.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with, when we are vulnerable and we admit that we're human, then we're more relatable. So then people who are also experiencing their own struggles or imperfections, then it's almost like, hey, I heard that Julie experienced that too. So now I'm okay that I experience the same thing, instead of always living in our world of I'm the only one and I can't believe I struggle with this, even though I'm striving so hard to perfection, right?
Yep. Definitely.
Here's another thing that I would love to hear from you if you see it in many other HR professionals. I experienced it myself, where, driven to success. You finish the bachelor's, you do the master's or whatever education, you get your certification, you say, all right, got the education. And then you go into the corporate world and you're always chasing the next rung of the corporate ladder, right? I need to get higher. I need to make more money. I need more responsibility. And in the world of HR, where we're in charge of policies and the protection of the company in many regards, and we have so much confidentiality with our jobs, then we think, well, if anything's imperfect, one, either I'm strong enough to fix it myself, or two, well, I can't tell anybody anyway, because it's confidential. Confidential of mine. I don't want to be vulnerable. I can't tell anybody. It's just this world that we've made up and that we kind of live in, right? So what would you say to somebody who's living in that world and really needs the help, but either because of ego or culture or confidentiality or whatever, they think, I don't even know who I could turn to or how?
Yeah. And I think that's a really good question, Ben. And I think that a lot of HR professionals actually do experience that. So many times when I talk to HR professionals, they go, oh my gosh, like if I'd known you like a year ago, 2 years ago, like this would be a completely different story for me. And so what I say to HR professionals who are experiencing that is just like take a pause and look around you, see who there is in your community that you trust, that you can be vulnerable enough with to say, look, all is not well. I need some support. What are your recommendations? And now that you know me through this podcast, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm sure Ben is here to help as well, so you can reach out to either of us. But I would say find those people in your community that you trust, that you can, even if it's just to ask a question of like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm experiencing, where do you think I could go to get some support for this? Or if the person can't support you, like, where can I go to get that? Do you know anyone? And now you know me.
There you go. I love it. So a couple more questions, and I'm going to leave them broad because I know that you have a lot of awesome things to share, so I don't want to lead it too much. You mentioned that HR professionals experience burnout.
Yes.
Why do you think they're experiencing burnout?
So many reasons. Again, you don't have enough time for this one, but anyway. So first and foremost, think about all the things that we continue to deal with on a daily basis, whether that's at an admin or process level, and then at a people level and at a leadership level. The constant battle to retain talent, find the right talent, to be diverse and inclusive in the workplace, to have the right technology, to be able to ease the people that we serve, their pains, to find the right benefit schemes, to reward people right, to build culture. There's like all of these different things that we're dealing with on a daily basis as HR professionals. And whether you're an HR department of 1 or an HR department of 40, the load is still heavy. In addition to that, you're dealing with people. And so people issues are going to come up every single day. And no matter where you work, at some point in time in your HR career, you're going to deal with very difficult terminations or separations from the organization. You're going to probably at some point in time experience a death of service by an employee. You're going to deal with some form of sexual harassment, some form of discrimination. Something is going to knock at your door that is going to be like, this story I cannot make up, like happening in your HR career. And then to just give us a test to see like if we really are resilient, along comes COVID. So like if we weren't dealing with all this other stuff already, then in comes COVID, and we have to find faster ways of getting everyone to work more flexible, to be able to introduce ways of working that everyone will feel comfortable and safe. In comes creating psychological safety. In comes speed at which you now have to integrate HR tech. In comes being able to build confidence with leaders and helping to close that perception gap that exists between the C-suite and HR. And so you have all of these different things happening, shifting HR in every single direction. And like I said, if you're an HR department of one and you're doing all of that by yourself, it is not sustainable. You need to stop it. Yeah. If you are, an HR department of 2 to 40 to 50, there's somewhere in there where, while you're doing great things for the organization, something is being missed, some ball is being dropped, just because it's so much that we're being asked to do, so much responsibility that we're being asked to bear. And then on top of that, we're working with people who have very little respect for us as a profession. We're working with people who can be very discriminatory and derogatory to us as professionals. We're almost always working below wage, and we're almost always working in a space where we're being asked to be responsive, even in moments of downtime. All of these things. And I'm going to pause for dramatic effect. Will lead us to be burned out, right? And so that's what we're dealing with today.
Right. Well, I'm glad you went into depth on that. As I asked the question, I almost thought, wow, that's almost disrespectful for me to say, why would HR feel burned out? Mm-hmm. But the reason is, I left it broad because I wanted to hear from your perspective, and you did a great job on that.
Thank you.
Because it's very true, especially with everything, just like you said, everything that HR is already expected to do. And then all of a sudden COVID hits. And the main brunt of majority of things that has to be figured out, how are we going to do remote work? How are we going to handle the layoffs, the rifts, the whatever we want to call it, and all of the uncertainty? Who does that fall on? Guess what? The HR pro, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have to live under that facade again, saying, oh yeah, I know the answer. Really? Well, nobody does.
Nobody knows.
Exactly.
Nobody knows. Nobody. I actually saw a video that really described it well on TikTok one day, which was like this lady, and I guess she was doing a voiceover of someone saying, like, were we supposed to have it figured out? Just asking. Okay, no? Okay, great. Because we don't.
Right.
We don't know. We were in a similar state to everyone else, which was we didn't know. So if we don't know what we don't know, how do we get to a state of being able to support? We have to listen, we have to watch, we have to wait for best practice, we have to collaborate together, share stories, share experiences, and that's how we learn, and that's how we've been able to kind of figure things out and move on while we wait for changes in legislation, which have also kind of like been that additional thing to throw you off your kilter, because now you have to adjust policy according to legislation. And that's not so easy for everyone. While in the Caribbean, that might be, we just listen to changes in legislation and we create processes and policies accordingly. But if you're living in the US, you have federal law, you have state law, the UK, similar things. So like, how do you have to wait for all of those things to kick in before you can make any kind of changes. So you're constantly waiting, and that in itself can be a form of anxiety and stress.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's move on to the subject of frustration. I really like that you brought this up, because in all the surveys I've ever done in my HR speeches, I ask them, what's the most common emotion that you're feeling right now? And it's always frustration. So I want to hear from you, working with the HR professionals you have, why or what is leading, let me rephrase this. What is causing the frustration of all these HR professionals?
What is causing the frustration? Several things. The fact that we're being asked to do more with no more money coming our way, or little support, less transparency, working with leaders who have no idea what they're doing. And all of these things can lead to frustration. You have employees who have different needs, who have different situations, and just the lack of impatience on their part can be a challenge. You have HR professionals who are now dealing with two sets of cultures, right? You have work culture and you have home culture. And if you've been like most families, passing ships in the night, you wake up in the morning, you see each other, you share breakfast, you go to work, you come back home, you share a meal, you go back to bed, and you start your day over. Now you're forced to be in a space with this person that you don't really know, and you're learning new things. And if you have children, you're homeschooling, and all of those different things now lead to, you got to figure out how does home culture work so that you can continue to do your day-to-day job. And all of these things are just like a melting pot, all coming together can be a great source of frustration because we're dealing with them all at once. If you have elderly parents living at home with you, that's another dynamic that you have to deal with. So like there are lots of different situations, but all leading back to the same pain point of frustration, which is how do I, do my job and manage my household all at once when I didn't, these things didn't intersect before. These things didn't converge, I should say, before. Now they are. How is that? Like, how am I supposed to cope with this? It's a problem.
Mm-hmm. No, Julie, what I love most about what you're sharing is how many specific examples you're sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it brings back memories for me, but I also know that the HR professionals listening to this can relate, and they can have the feeling of, oh, thank goodness I'm not alone in this, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that is one of the most effective things that we can do for our mental health, is simply be heard, seen for where we are, and validated for what we're experiencing, right?
Yes.
I'm often asked, okay, what's a program that you suggest for a company to enhance the mental health of the workplace?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we could go through a bazillion options,
Mm-hmm.
but really what it comes down to is, well, do you know your people? Do you know what they're going through?
Yeah.
And are you listening? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So in our conversation so far, I've just asked some broad questions and you've given some specific examples. We haven't really gone through and said, okay, here's the 5 steps to fix your mental health or whatever.
Right.
But I really hope that people hear that and feel that and say, wow, I'm okay. Or at least I feel like I'm not alone in what I'm going through. There is hope. Julie's been through her stuff and she's awesome. She's happy. She's sharing some excellent words of wisdom here.
Mm-hmm.
Ben's been through his stuff and he's there too. And so now that I feel like I'm validated and I'm safe, then I can go to the next step, which I may already know, and I've just been held back on a few things, or, hey, I didn't know there was a resource, so now I can reach out to either Julie or Ben, just like you said.
Exactly.
So any other thoughts on the subjects that we've covered before we jump into 1 or 2 final questions?
So I think based on what we've covered so far, I think it's really important for people to know exactly, just as you said, that, we're all human. And no matter how good things look on the outside, we all have our own internal struggles. We're all dealing with our own demons. And so I think it's really important that we try to, just have patience with ourselves and come to a space where we don't beat ourselves up for past mistakes or for the way that we've dealt with our self-care in the past. Just be okay to say, look, I forgive myself. I forgive me. Forgive yourself for the way that you dealt with yourself previously. And now start to think about, so now how do I move on from here? I think that's really important.
Huge. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your wisdom and all the things you can help people with. Your vulnerability, that's huge. I think a lot of people will be blessed by your experiences. And I see behind you this book.
Yes.
Is there anything you'd like to share with us about that book?
So this is my first self-published book. It's called Confessions of an HR Pro: Stories of Defeat and Triumph. And it's just some stories that some amazing HR professionals were open and vulnerable enough to share with me about their experiences in the HR profession, and I share mine as well. And we talk about our moments of defeat and our moments of triumph, and we also talk about our lessons learned, and we're just sharing them because I feel like this book didn't exist before. We have so many HR textbooks, And we have so many how-to books. But what we don't have is a lot of books where HR professionals are actually saying, you know what, I love what I do, but there are moments when this particular piece really frustrates me, or really I've struggled with in the past, but this is how I've dealt with it. And this is how I've sought to improve myself. And also for those HR professionals who are struggling with finding their community, I have a page in the book which is just all about different HR communities that exist that you can go jump on and be a part of immediately and be received with open arms. And I share my story about why I created HR at Heart, and how you can reach out to me to get the support that you need to help you in your HR career.
Awesome. And where can people find a copy of the book if they'd like one?
The book is available on Amazon right now in paperback and also in Kindle version. I am working to get it into some indie bookstores and also to get it in other online stores, but it takes time trying to navigate these things from the Caribbean. So soon I'll have other spaces to share.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing, and thank you for being on the show, Julie.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Ben.